All right. Hi, everyone. I am here with Hillary and Jeff Whittington, and I am so glad that they've made time today. In fact, I want to make sure I sort of remind everyone, if you haven't already read their book, please do. And we're going to have a conversation. Actually, I'll take a second out to sort of promote this book as well, sort of the book that Stephanie Brill and I just wrote called The Transgender Teen. And today we're going to talk with Hillary and Jeff, and the three of us are going to have sort of just an open discussion about some of the issues that come up when trying to parent kids that fall outside of sort of society's norms around gender in one way or another, either transgender, non-binary, or otherwise gender-expansive kids. And I want to thank people that sent in some questions, so we're going to incorporate that in as well. And I think we'll just go ahead and maybe get started. And I'm going to start by asking you guys a question, if I can. And the first one really is just about this generational divide around gender. And I know that you do a lot of work in your community and in a number of ways in our broader society around gender. And one of the things that's really complex is most people start, when they think about gender, they really think about, well, frankly, genitals, right? It's like our baby was assigned this sex at birth, and so we assume that we know what their gender is. And then all of a sudden that doesn't end up being true, that we realize that gender actually is more complex than just our bodies, but also involves lots of other parts of our sense of self and then also how we express that. And the truth is most people just haven't thought very much about it and haven't needed to. And so when the issue starts to come up, you can sort of feel like you're talking a different language. And I'm wondering how you both sort of deal with that in your own worlds and how you've tried to maybe bridge that generational gap with people in your life, maybe your own families or in the work that you do as you try to talk about this issue.
I mean, I think for me personally, I'll let you answer too. I think I start off by saying that I confused gender and sexuality, and I confused gender in the beginning, just like everyone else. I thought that when the doctor says it's a girl, that the baby's a girl. I really didn't have to think about it any further than that, like most people. And I think Ryland has taught us so much about gender. And I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there is that big generational gap, but I think it comes down to exactly what you're saying. It's about education, and it's about teaching people the difference between sex and gender and how it's not always what we thought it was going to be. That big, when you see those new couples having babies and they do the big gender reveal and you go, really? Do you really know? Because you don't.
Exactly.
I've become increasingly uncomfortable seeing those things.
Right.
You really don't know. And that's because they go and they get a sonogram and they see the sex of the baby, but they don't realize that it doesn't necessarily correlate to gender. And it's those conversations. And I think that, the easiest conversations are to have with people that know you personally, that know the story and that have seen the experiences that we've gone through. And those are the people who are generally more open to accepting it and listening and receiving the education. Obviously, there's those that just, they have no experience to go by, and it's just it.
Yeah, well, and my favorite thing is people that will say, well, I wasn't thinking about that when I was their age. And I say, yeah, of course, I wasn't really either, because my brain aligned with the body, that I had from birth. And I think until you are forced to, are opened up to this and have heard stories and maybe met us, most people probably do think that gender is decided right at birth. And we've learned, through our experiences with Ryland, that that's just not the case at all. And the more research I've done, the more I've recognized that this is definitely, they say it, and I'll say it again, gender is between the ears, not between the legs. It's very true.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think too, you're raising a great point. And Jeff, the gender reveals remind me too of that issue where, so much of what happens for parents is the grieving of in this transition, that it's like, wait a minute, I had this relationship with my child. In some ways, what parents don't realize, because every parent, this is true, is that, this preceded this child, right? That the dreams, and in some ways, what we're really grieving is not, parents aren't really grieving the actual child. The actual child is still themselves, very much the child they've always been. It's the fantasy child. It's this fantasy thing that we create as parents for all of our kids, that we do have to let go of that. And the truth is, most parents have to let go of that anyway over the course of their child's life, but they usually get a little bit longer, to let go of that, and it sort of gets accelerated in this case. Is that sort of been your experience in this as part of your own journey as parents?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
I mean, and speaking of that, I think as parents, we just naturally sort of have these images in our head of what our child's life is going to look like, and that's actually very dangerous. I feel like parents will, want to turn their kids even into crazy, amazing drummers or the best athlete, and I sort of have seen that parents do this in all ways of raising children. Trying to impose on your child what you want them to be versus who they are. I mean, I think that we're able to guide our children in some ways, but gender is hardwired, and I believe that there's nothing that we could have done other than make Ryland feel shameful to change who he felt he was. So it's interesting, though, just to...
Well, I think you hit it dead on. I mean, there is absolutely 100% a grieving process, but what you are grieving is that vision that you had for your child and everything you thought it was supposed to be. I mean, when we found out Ryland, when we had met with the not the audiologist, but we had the ultrasound done, and we said, "Oh, it's a girl," and I mean, the room was instantly bathed in pink, and we were set up for our little girl, and the closet was full of dresses, and you just start to envision raising this little girl. And then, when we realized what was happening and Ryland went through that transition, in your head, you've got to say that girl that I was visioning is gone.
But still
at the same time,
child.
it's the same child, but it's what really helps push through that is watching when that transition occurs in the child, the blossoming and just that change in who the child's always the same, but when you really allow them to express themselves and you just see a completely different child, and at the happiness, at least that was our experience, the smiles, just that you could see that inside Ryland felt so different. That really pushes that grieving process along very quickly.
Yeah. I think, Jeff, that's such an important point. And Hillary, to your point about, when people say, well, they're too young to know, right? This is a common one. We'll get to that, I think, because some of the questions that were sent in are some common misconceptions, I think. But one of them is that they're too young to know, when in fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics says, by age 3, children readily differentiate based on gender, and including their own gender. By age 4, their gender identity is fairly stable. So what's different, though, is that for cisgender kids, and it's not like, oh, that's only true for cisgender kids, but not for, transgender or non-binary kids. It's just true for people. It's a developmental process. It's not always true. It's not linear, and it's not necessarily true for everybody, but it's true for the vast majority of kids. What's really interesting to me is that, but if you don't line up, well, then you're too young to know. But if you do line up and you have kids in the playground at elementary school or preschool who identify and they assert their gender identity, people are like, well, yeah, of course they know, And when you ask people generally, if you say, what are your earliest gendered memories? One of the first times when you began to hear people talk about, what it meant to be a little boy or a little girl, and then the decisions they began to make out of that, actually it is really young. And so it's one of those misconceptions that people say, oh, they're too young to know. And in fact, virtually everybody knows. Most people know and have a fairly stable sense of it. I think one of the really challenging things is for trans and non-binary kids, because there's no language really available to them. And it's even worse than that, because most parents, when their child does assert a gender identity that's different than the one that was assumed, they go, you know what, I know, but actually, girls can like those things too. But boys can like doing those kinds of things or wearing those clothes. That's okay too. And there's a lot of emphasis on, sort of normalizing a certain band, but still keeping them in the gender box that they started with. And it's always an amazing thing to me, just the human desire to express our authentic self somehow, that really is so early and shows up in our language, that somebody can say at a very young age, no, I know that, but that's not what I'm saying. No, I'm trying to tell you that it's okay if, some girls like those things and they're not a boy, but I like those things and I am a boy, even though you think I'm a girl. And I think what's perplexing is that we often don't think that children have that capacity when in fact we see it in 1,000 different ways. I mean, everybody that's a parent or a teacher or works with young kids actually sees that happen in day-to-day living, but when it falls outside the realm of what we expect or what we're comfortable with maybe as adults, then we start to question and say, well, is that really okay? And it's scary. And if we haven't thought about it, it's really confusing. And that I completely get. We just have to be careful not to go that next step and say, oh, so therefore the child's wrong. Instead of I'm just uncomfortable.
To add to that, I will tell you that even when Ryland was before transition, he would, we allowed him to wear more boyish type clothing and let him play with whatever toys he wanted to, but he knew that he had to walk even a thin line with us because we were okay with him being a tomboy, but it was like he started to pick up on social cues that we were giving him without even realizing it. And I think kids are smart and they know that they can see parents being uncomfortable with certain things, and sure. I think a lot of the times they can change their tune just to kind of make their parents happy, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of us want to make our parents happy, and that was a big struggle for us, just knowing that Ryland could do some things, but then once he sort of pushed it over the edge, we kind of had a little pushback. And so
but two things on that, which one just leads into an entirely different conversation, but I always feel the need to mention it. The term tomboy drives me crazy. And it drives me crazy because that's what everyone kind of classified Ryland as for so long. Ryland's just a tomboy. It's a tomboy. And
it was celebrated.
And it's celebrated. And I said, what is the equally respected term for what everyone identifies as a little boy who feels or who identifies as a girl,
who wants to wear dresses,
and wants to wear dresses.
That's right.
There isn't a socially acceptable term. So why do we have this double standard? Anyway. So that kind of got me to listen a little bit further. But the other part about when you're touching on just children of that age knowing, they do know, and it's really interesting when they allow them to express that and we start listening. And one of the hardest things you have to do as a parent is step back for a moment, say, I'm going to put my kid in the driver's seat for a second, which is scary because that's not what we're taught to do as parents. We're taught to guide our children, to lead them through these early parts of their life. We're in the driver's seat, set the rules, set the boundaries, and putting them in the front seat is scary. But you kind of have in these situations, that's what we ended up having to do with Ryland is, you know what, you need to show us where this is going. Because as soon as we allowed him to guide us a little bit, then it was much clearer what we were dealing with or what we had on, where we were going with this. So it's.
But he wanted to make us happy, and I think once he got the okay from us that we would love him no matter what, and that we would help him, and he could be honest with us. I think that was a huge breakthrough for him, even at 5 years old, just to know, wow, mom and dad are going to love me, even if I really am a boy.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I absolutely do. And I think also the importance of that you guys are hitting on is that, I think a lot of parents don't want to open the box because they're afraid they don't know what to do once the box is open. What happens when your child says, this is who I am? I think the challenge is to just be okay that you don't need to know yet. All you're doing in that moment, which is what you did, was to say, we're listening. Like we're just going to spec, and you tell us. You didn't yet know what was going to be required or what was going to need it. All you were saying was, let's take this next step. And the next step is, tell us who you are. You're trying to tell us. We've been trying to tell you who you are. How about you tell us who you are? At least in this one area. And I think that can just feel really frightening to parents because the next step is then, and then what? But you don't need to know. And it doesn't necessitate anything. You have to then sort of make those decisions for yourself.
I'm so sorry here.
Don't worry about it.
Apparently your phone's connected to you.
Sorry, I didn't know my phone was connected.
That's life, right? Don't worry about it. But I think, it's such an important point and so important to name that it can feel really uncomfortable, Jeff, when, you're told, no, you're supposed to not only be in the driver's seat, but you're supposed to be able to control this. There's this fantasy, and I tell this story one time when I was on an airplane. I'm sitting next to this guy, and somehow we start talking for reasons I can't even remember about being a parent, and he's going on and on about this, his parenting philosophy and all this stuff, and I said, wow, I got to tell you, I feel like every day it's an improvisation. I have no idea the best thing to do. I do my best. I don't always meet the mark with my 2 kids. But wow, you really seem to feel comfortable with it. I said, so how many kids do you have and how old are they? And he says, oh, I don't have any kids yet. It's like, oh yeah, the most certain I ever was before I was a parent. And then the actual children showed up, and it ends up, it's just infinitely more complicated.
It's easy to give advice, but you don't have your own.
Right?
Exactly. So I think, that's one of those things. And I think, as you said, just, when you realize, listen, my child's in pain, this is not working. My telling them who they are and what their gender is isn't happening. That's just not successful. How about I listen? And let's not worry yet about what this means. Let's not worry about all the answers I do not have to questions I haven't even thought of. Let's just start by having a conversation. Absolutely. And then listen. And the power of that and the healing and the love that can create and engender is really a powerful thing. Yeah, that's good.
I joke about it, but this was not written about in that thick book that I read when I was pregnant called What to Expect When You're Expecting, because I read it from cover to cover and I thought I knew everything I needed to know.
That's right.
It really should be added, by the way.
It really should be added. It's not so simple, right? That's exactly right. Maybe it'll come out in the next edition since it's become the Bible along the way. So we brought up a couple of the questions that we had talked about covering, some of the things that come up. And maybe we'll hit on a couple of those briefly. And then I do want to ask you guys, I think, a question about managing this. Once it does raise itself as an issue, how do you manage that? But I know some of the sort of common questions or misconceptions that some of the people that are going to watch this might be having is, one of them we addressed, are the kids too young to know? And I think we've talked about that. I think one of the other issues is gender choice. And I think, at least what I hear you saying, and certainly our experience in our work, is that gender is not a choice. You can choose what to do about your gender, but how I experience myself is a very internal process, and it isn't one that I make a choice about. Is there anything else you would add to that, or anything you think that needs to be said?
No, I would agree. I mean, that's certainly the conclusion that we came to, and that, Ryland has never shown it to be a choice. You ask, and if you talk to Ryland, even though he's 8 years old, he'll tell you, I didn't choose this. This was something that I've felt since I was very young. And what was just the further evidence of that for us was just talking to older transgender folks who just said that they had felt this way for as long as they could possibly remember. That was not a choice, as you said. It was just a choice, or when they felt like they had the ability to make a transition and to live authentically. It was more a matter of when they chose to express that gender that they had felt since,
Which I mean, just a note on that too. I know that not all people, know as young as Ryland, and I think it's important to know that, not everyone's experiences are the same, and that's something that I'm constantly learning, that not all kids feel this way at Ryland's age. But
I think part of that is giving them the language, though, and having the conversation and allowing them to understand what the possibilities are and are not. Because a lot of, and I'm sorry, I just talked over you, but a lot of transgender people that we've spoken with have said that, I wish this had been an option for me when I was younger. I wish I'd known this was a possibility when I was younger. But the conversation wasn't there. The language wasn't there. We didn't talk about this. So it wasn't felt to be an option.
Didn't have the internet back then.
Yeah. So
or resources. You think about little kids growing up in rural areas, that may not even get to meet someone like lesbian or gay, in their neighborhood. So I can imagine that this was even, was 50 times harder years ago. And even for us, when we went through this with Ryland in 2012, even at that point, there were very few resources available and not a ton on the internet like there is now. So I feel like the more that we're talking about this, the more, doing things like this, it's good. I think people just need to know this is really something that can happen with children.
Well, and it's so true. And you guys raise a lot of great points in that not all kids come to it at the same time. And for a lot of reasons, as you say, Jeff, sometimes it's just access to language or resource or information. I think that's changing a lot. So that's interesting. We certainly, in the book that Steph and I wrote, one of the things that we try to address is that some parents, the first time they're hearing is when their kid is a teenager. Right. And teens communicate it in some interesting ways. I mean, we've heard some really funny stories, and we've also heard some really sad stories. But I think one of the ways in which I think each person comes to this understanding and at whatever point feels that they're simply at that point where it needs to be expressed, maybe privately to parents or privately to friends, depending on where they are in the situation that they're living in. But at some point, it finds its way to an authentic expression of their self. And then I think it's not linear at that point. So it's not like, I mean, I still may try things on, right? I mean, when there's so many things, and Jeff, your point about there's no equivalent for boys to a tomboy is really, really important. We talk about that a lot too. And so it's very difficult. How do you try something on when everybody is shaping you or trying to define you? And then how do you find your voice in the midst of that? Some of it has to be exploration. That doesn't mean you're going to know or that it's always going to take the same shape. But that fundamental sense of self, which is different than what I choose to wear or how I choose to express it, that sense of self, even if what I call it changes, I think that actually is the stable part that the American Academy of Pediatrics is talking about. So I might, as I realize that there's not just two names for gender, but there's been literally, I think, an infinite number of names for gender. I might change whether I identify as one thing or another, but it's only an evolving language that I'm trying to apply to an internal experience. And I think that's one of the things that you're trying to hit on too. I think one of the things too that comes up for parents is, did we do this, right? Did this happen because of us? And I'm always saddened when I hear it because I know underlying that is all this blame that parents get, right? You did this, you really wanted a boy or girl, which is like, it's hard to really capture how ridiculous that is, but
go home and try and change the gender of any of your children who good luck with it. I hope it goes. It's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, good luck with that. And many have tried, and it hasn't worked out that well. Exactly. Right. And I think one of the things that's sad though is no parent says, "Did I create my cisgender child?" Either. It's just the truth is it's not a parenting issue. It's gender is an internal thing for each one of us. And I think what I do try to find some comforting words, I think, for parents, which is to say, if your child is expressing their gender and that gender does not fit what they've been told and what society is telling them, that is an act of love and trust and faith that your child is expressing for you. Because if they don't feel that, they will not. In all the reasons that you said, Hillary, they want to protect you. They want to protect their relationship with you. I mean, a child will not risk love unless they really feel there's no recourse. So I think when a child expresses that at whatever age they do, whether it's as a younger child or a teenager, what they're saying to you is, I love you and I'm desperately counting on you to continue to love me.
Yeah.
I think that's the important thing that parents need to know.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree with you more. That makes me a little emotional because it's true. If your child trusts you enough to tell you who they are, then it's almost a gift for them telling you, I love you and I need your help, I mean, the alternative is, we know what the alternative is, and it's not pretty. So,
and they have to, and that to that, I mean, they've got to trust that you're still going to love me. Like, I trust that you will still love me if I tell you, or if I, and I express myself in this way.
Absolutely.
Too many kids don't feel that trust. They don't have that trust. And yeah, it just goes down bad roads.
And I think too, I mean, the thing that really breaks my heart is when I talk to families who have deep religious roots that sometimes get in the way of that. I think that's been a huge struggle for this community, just not feeling like they're going to be ostracized from their faith community, whatever that may be. And I think that that's heartbreaking to me. I feel like whoever your God is, he wants you to love your child first and foremost, and that's just one thing that sort of hits home for me. I just never want kids to feel like they can't be who they are because they're going to be kicked out of, whatever faith that they belong to. So, yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking. I'm sure you see it too.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely do. And it's so important. And I do want to say one more thing about faith before we move off to the next topic, which is just, I mean, I know that when I was a teenager, I didn't come from a religious family. We were not a church-going family. But when I was a teenager, I did come into a very personally important spiritual understanding of myself. And I found such great comfort in that at a time when I was really struggling with who I was and wondering. And I think that and I remember reading, and my personal faith tradition is in Christianity, and I was reading the New Testament. And I remember this moment where I just realized that the most profound message in all that I was reading was about love.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's the thing that has always stayed with me. And that's the thing that I just try to remind all youth in particular, that if they feel like there's a conflict, the fundamental tenets of faith is love, and that we are all part of this creation. And I think it is incredibly sad if at the point that you most need the comfort of a faith, that you feel like that faith is not available. That can destroy you.
Absolutely.
And it's a really serious thing. So I'm glad you raised that. I feel really strongly similarly about that issue. Because for some, that's the only thing they have. If they're experiencing rejection by family, and maybe at school, among friends and others, for them to have that one place that they can hold on to, and if they can't, that really can be the thing that just makes it too much for them to deal with.
I agree, 100%.
So one of the things we've touched on a little bit too is just, so at whatever point this, your child's gender becomes a focus for a family, it can just turn your world upside down. It literally takes sort of the life that you've imagined and that you've been trying to create and sort of causes it to come into question. And there's just so many things that are really challenging, that it's not about your child. It's just about what the topic coming in means and how you wrestle with that individually. In families where there's two parents, it's also challenging, I think, because you come to different understandings, you have different histories, you're on your own timetables, you've got all this stuff going on. And I know this is a big topic, and we could probably spend a whole time just talking about that, and we don't have enough time today to do that. But I was wondering if you could maybe just touch briefly on how you've navigated this in your life. And I know that sometimes it falls to the mom to sort of take the lead if there's a mother and a father in the family. And sometimes what becomes sort of a practical decision early on, like, okay, you go do research and report back, eventually can become, and Jeff, I know sometimes it means the dad sometimes initially gets sort of relegated to the sidelines, but sometimes that can become structural. It's equally isolating for both parents because each of you is struggling with that. And I don't know your story on that, but I'm just wondering if you could just say a little bit about, was this true for you in your family, and how have you navigated that a bit in terms of, over the years? I know that it's still, I'm sure it's not an issue that's over, but, how you've sort of seen this in your own experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was a struggle. I mean, it was definitely two different journeys for quite some time. We were on different paths. I kind of chose to be on the sideline. And I think oftentimes it's based upon your own personal fears, your own experiences, your own environment. I at the time was working as a full-time firefighter in a very kind of what is oftentimes a very, for lack of a better term, kind of a macho, I didn't feel comfortable discussing what was going on at home. So I really kind of just clammed up. I didn't want to talk about it. Hillary was involved in research, and she was, but she was around Ryland every day. She had the conversations with Ryland. I was gone a lot because I was working so much. And I just didn't want to talk about it. For me, Ryland was Already, we were dealing with the deaf diagnosis and the cochlear implants. I felt that Ryland already stood out a little bit. I could not wrap my head around something that we had to deal with. Another thing that could make Ryland, I guess what I was thinking, make Ryland different, make Ryland an outcast. I was afraid of what it would mean with our friends, what it would mean with our family, what it would mean with Ryland's friends. I was completely 100%, I shouldn't say 100%, but mostly fear-based on what was going to happen. Hillary charged forward. It brought us to near divorce. We just could not get on the same page. And as you've said, we've seen this with a number of families that are within our support group. Another who for 6 months, his wife would attend the meetings and he would not come at all, wanted nothing to do with it. And now he was one of the strongest advocates I've ever seen. It's our own journey. And I think that's why we chose to go public with it, because one of the things, and this isn't the case for everyone, and we acknowledge that, but one of the things that I think for us, those fears that we've had along the way oftentimes have been way too built up within ourselves. They didn't pan out the way that we are afraid. They think, things our community was accepting. Ryland didn't lose friends. We've lost some people, and yes, some of it's been a struggle. We've had some really tough conversations, but for the most part, we didn't need to fear as much as we did. And so we want people to understand and see that, because I think that fear can be that's the big thing that can keep you from taking that next step into affirming your child.
But I think we've been lucky too. I don't know why we've had such a positive experience for the most part, but we have. And I feel like because of our experience, I feel like it's our duty to stand up for this community, because the amount of sad stories that I read or that I deal with on a constant level just makes me realize that not all communities are this open and loving, and there are some really horrible things that go on to families that are on this journey. And so I just think it's important that we just help in any way we can, educate people and make them realize that Ryland, it's funny, there's nothing that goes on here that isn't like any other family. The kids come home from school, they want a snack, that it's not this like big weird thing. And truthfully, we don't even think about gender anymore. We don't use the word transgender in our home unless it comes from Ryland. There's just no need.
We're not trying to avoid it. It's just not a big topic of conversation anymore.
He's just a kid who wants to play with his friends and have dessert after dinner,
Or before too, if he probably could.
Before, and won't eat his vegetables, but that's a whole other thing,
That's right.
I think it's important to normalize this a little bit. And yeah, we've had more hurdles than most families, but in the big picture, this isn't life or death if you support your child. And it could be worse. It really could. He's not on a ventilator. He's not he's not in the hospital. He's a healthy, happy kid. We just need to make sure we educate those around us so that he's continued to be supported and society realizes that we've done nothing wrong and he's perfect the way he is.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that, just kind of going back to that for a moment, I think just knowing ahead of time that the husband and wife, or the whoever, whether it's husband, wife, whoever it is, the parents, I should just say, that the parents may be on two different journeys. I think acknowledging that and knowing that ahead of time is important, because you then can kind of empathize with the other person and see when you're on a different path and try and figure out and understand why the other person is kind of reacting the way that they're reacting. I don't think we were just so blind going into this journey, we didn't know you don't know. You're just so afraid. And I think we were unable to connect in that way. And we didn't know if either one of us was ever going to come back together and be on the same path. And we definitely are on the same journey now. I can't even think of the last time that we had any, like any sort of disagreement as to like how we are handling Ryland's situation and how we're advocating for him. And we're pretty much,
I want to touch a little bit on the support. Each parent needs support in their own way. And, Jeff's way of dealing with it was he clammed up, didn't want to talk about it. I, on the other hand, was lucky enough to have TIFA. There's online support groups that parents have now that is so powerful and important. And I think about too the parents out there who are divorced. I can't even imagine having to deal with certain decisions you have to make and be completely on different sides of the room, but it's possible. And there's a lot of support out there now. I mean, I know you guys are a huge resource at Gender Spectrum, and we're lucky now that we have more resources. So.
Yeah, and I it's so right. I mean, I think that getting support is essential, whatever that support looks like to you. And it may take a little while, as you say, Jeff, to get to figuring out, maybe you need that time to just go and figure out what's going on and think about it on your own. And maybe, and that's not for everyone, but ultimately I think figuring out what that support looks like. And I think that, there are books today, like Raising Ryland, that I think are helpful. I think also the Transgender Teen and Transgender Child that talk about these general issues. Sometimes I think what's wonderful about individual stories is that it gives you a deeper sense of a journey, some of which will apply, but some of which won't, but you still see there's a journey and everybody's on their own journey, and that's really helpful, I think. There's just so many ways, and one of the questions we got was a parent for today's event was about a parent concerned about Child Protective Services being contacted, and that's not, it's not an unheard of thing. Thankfully, it's, generally now if they get contacted, there's enough to, and even in the most conservative parts of the country, certainly if somebody does have a bad experience, they should reach out to Gender Spectrum and we would work to find support for them. But it's still a fear that lives with many parents that is just by loving and listening to your child and supporting them, that this is going to happen. And I think it's really important to name that this is a really difficult and confusing time, and finding support in a place that you can go to, whether that's, Gender Spectrum or TIFA or Generosity or any of the organizations that are supporting youth, or going to a PFLAG meeting, or going to if there's an LGBTQIA or whatever acronym they have, center near you, going to an online group, doing whatever it is that you can to just find a place as a parent to say, hey, this is where I am today.
And you're not alone.
And you're not alone. It's just incredibly, incredibly powerful.
There's a lot of parents out there who've been through this journey who are willing to offer the support and willing to be the ear and to, absolutely. And it's important to find that. And Spectrum, going to Gender Spectrum was very powerful for us. Mm-hmm. Very powerful. And
as a family, we grew a lot after attending.
I was exhausted after that weekend. I said, Sunday, I just went, oh my goodness.
Exactly. It's time to go, right? Isn't it over? Yeah.
No, but in a great way. Like, it was very,
loved it.
It was powerful. There was a lot to learn. There was a lot to understand. There were some great connections made. A lot of support, a lot of just, it was great. Yeah, Ryland loved it. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, and I think it's important for kids to see, and meet someone that's like them, but just someone that they can relate to. I think that's been so powerful for our family. And I think many of the families out there, if there's a way for them to meet someone in their area who they can relate to, a gender creative child that is along the same age as theirs, it's huge. Absolutely huge.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I know we've only been able to hit on just the top level of just a couple issues, but I really want to thank you both. Hillary and Jeff Whittington, thank you so much for taking time today. Thank you for your terrific book, Raising Ryland. I appreciate that. And I just really value the time that you took to have this conversation today and to help share your experience with parents. So thank you very much.
Thank you to you too, Lisa. We're happy to be here, and I really enjoyed your book as well. Transgender Teen, definitely a must read for families on this journey. So thank you for what you're doing too. We appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Well, have a great day, and we'll connect soon, hopefully on some other topic we could cover together.
Sounds good, Lisa. Have a good one.
Thank you.